Hello, hi. Oh my God. Hello, Milwaukee. Thank you so much for coming.
That reveal got exactly the reaction I wanted. Um, so hello, darling.
Hello.
Um,
Hello, dear.
um, we are so thrilled to be here in Milwaukee for the last stop as of right now on on your tour for this book,
Yes.
America Let Me In, a choose your immigration story. Um,
Like that you had to check the name of the book that we have been touring with for 5 months.
I had to check the name of the book because the title is written in a very specific way. Would you like to tell our audience this evening why the title is written in such a specific way?
Right. It is America Let Me In, a choose your immigration story. You might feel like there's some words missing there or some words that you would usually put there, like choose your own, or maybe like it would be choose your own something else. And I just want to say that for legal reasons, this book has nothing to do, no similarity at all with the Choose Your Own Adventure books published by ChooseCo, a real company called ChooseCo, who is incredibly litigious and who has sued Netflix and who has sued many other brands. Um, and I we have no desire to for them to realize that we exist. And so we'll keep it as choose your immigration story, and the own is not there, but you guys can put that in there, and that way you guys can make that own your own.
And it's also, as you've mentioned over the course of the tour, there's also a Latin American tradition to the interactive. Uh,
Yes, yes, that is also true. And that is certainly something that I thought of from the beginning, which is that in Latin America, there is a literary tradition of the interactive novel. I'm sure you can find it here because Boswell has literally every book that has ever existed, I think. But there is, in particular, two books that I think are a big part of this tradition are Borges's Ficciones, which is usually translated just as Ficciones, the title, which is a very like kind of it's a short story collection that's kind of like jumbly and all about puzzles and riddles and mirrors and stuff like that. And then the very cool book Hopscotch, Rayuela, originally by Julio Cortázar, who is also an Argentine writer and who wrote a novel that is entirely interactive that starts with a paragraph saying like, hey, you can read this novel as in any way that you want, but I recommend these two. The first one, you read it from the beginning to the end, and it ends in chapter 50 something. And then the rest of it you can just not read, which is great if you have it assigned in school. And then the second way, he actually provides a key. Like you start in chapter 43, then you go to one, then you go to this, and he has the list of the chapters. And he's like, this is like the way that you can also read it. And the pages of the book on the sides, they all have the number of the chapter that you're reading so that you know by the end, when you reach the end of the chapter, you're jumping to that other chapter. So obviously, this very postmodern book written by this like incredible, like incredibly influential for me, really. Like when I read his short stories as a high schooler, I was like, what? Um, by this incredible postmodern writer, part of the like Latin American boom that also includes like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Mario Vargas Llosa, Carlos Fuentes. Like these are Nobel Prize winners, and I'm obviously in the same league as all of them. And I've included myself in this literary narrative.
and talk a little bit about the decision to tell these stories in this way. So this is a for those of you who haven't had a chance to leaf through it or read it. This is essentially an interactive book about various legal immigration pathways in the United States and what they require. And you can make decisions for which types of visas you apply to, what types of jobs that you try to get. And it tells many, many different immigrant stories of varying degrees of ridiculousness. Um, so, talk a little bit about why you wanted to write about immigration, why you wanted to write about immigration funny, and why you wanted to write about funny immigration in this form.
Why I wanted to write about immigration is because I'm an immigrant, and I am, as I say in the book, I'm tired for all the stories that ever get made to be about like the founder of like an app that like goes crazy and like steals a bunch of money, but like maybe goes to jail, but also gets a deal from Netflix to make a mini series about them, you know? And like I feel like that's what every it's either that or like what if white people who are very rich are also bad? Have you noticed that that's every TV show now? Like it's watch one season of The White Lotus or Succession. You've seen all of them. Um,
You
dude,
don't believe that. You love
I
Succession.
do love Succession. I do love Succession. It is the best show ever.
Wife fact check.
Yeah. But I did want to write a bunch of immigrant stories because I am an immigrant and I wanted to write them funny because that's the only way I know how to write. I'm a comedian. I am not like an activist or a lawyer or, dedicated like poet. So I was like, well, I can explain this through humor because first, like that's kind of my job. What I do every day at the Late Show with Stephen Colbert is like process the news through the filter of humor. And second, because I did feel like I had to explain it a lot because I moved here, I went to school here for grad school, and then I went to New York where I was surrounded by like well-meaning progressives and liberals from like in their 20s in 2016, Bernie bros. And they had no idea how the immigration system worked. And this was Trump's original like first campaign, and the immigration is at the forefront, right? Like he started with like they're not sending their best. So immigration is like the biggest theme of the election. And people are like, but you're like an immigrant, but you came to school here, so you're fine, right? And I'm like, no. It's so hard. You don't have no idea. I had to get this permit called OPT, and then I had to and I only got 1 year, and anyone who's in STEM gets 3 years. And then once I got OPT, then I really, it's like a ticking time bomb because like you only have 1 year and you have to get a job. If you don't get a job within 90 days, then you have to leave. And then, you get your OPT, but then you have to stay. And so I would probably need an H-1B, which is obviously, and then obviously I kept talking like this and they left. Uh, and so I realized that most Americans have no idea how this system works. And but I also know that most Americans have very strong opinions about immigration. So I wanted to write a book that would explain the system a little bit, that would not necessarily educate, but almost like, okay, if you're going to have an opinion, that's great, but have it be an educated opinion. And so I wrote this, and then landing on the interactive method was a way for me to insert the reader into the narrative, making this your story rather than just the story of immigrants that I made up. Um, the stories are, for the most part, made up. They're inspired by sometimes there's a particular path where it's like inspired by things that happened to me. But there's some paths that are inspired by other immigrants that I know, but they are decidedly like mostly fictional because I wanted to really make them the reader's stories.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about I think something that the the idea of this book being funny, right? I think calls to mind different types of humor that a book about a topic so heavy could be, right? You can go into the satire area or other kind of just like flippant, it's not super serious and so we're calling it funny, I guess. But this book is like goofy.
Yeah.
It's silly. Babar is involved. At a point, there's romantic intercourse with centaurs. Um, France is just destroyed, like
Roasted, roasted,
roasted,
not destroyed like a
That's
bomb
right.
hits it. It's like more like I don't know. Somehow I discovered that I had a bunch of jokes to make about France as I was writing the book, and so I just made them. There's also I've discovered. Sorry to cut you off,
No,
but
cut me off.
I've discovered from the like reviews that I've read, and my sister who's here, she lives in England. Um, some people online who have read the book in England have been like, "Yeah, this was really fun, but what the is this guy's deal with England? Why does he have like a problem with us?" And I really didn't like mean to do it. I did have like a couple jokes about like these people are miserable because they have to live in London. That was just like a little joke that was targeted at my sister. But no, I don't know. Like I think it was just a way to like talk about this very heavy subject in my voice, which is very silly and very goofy. I pride myself in my humor, like being like that. And I do think it's a very good way to address these things, to address not just immigration, but politics in general. Is it's important to remember how silly everything is. And the system of immigration is absurd. Um, maybe you're what I'm trying to say here is one of the first visas that I applied to and got was the O1B Alien of Extraordinary Ability visa. Correct. That is the correct reaction. Um, right. Alien of extraordinary ability. That is already absurd and ridiculous, right? So if you're a thing that they teach you when you're trying to like learn about comedy and writing humor and comedy is heightening. You have to take something that is real and heighten it to an absurd level, which is what makes satire a little bit hard these days when something like alligator Alcatraz is a serious term tweeted by the Department of Homeland Security, then how do you heighten that? You can't go like, oh, well, there's sharks and a moat because there's literally gators and a swamp around this detention center. So, for me, when the base reality is alien of extraordinary ability, you have to go crazy, you have to go silly, and that's how you end up with, a romantic relationship with Babar the elephant from the children's book, or some sexual entanglements with a horde of very hunky centaurs who look like Usher and Gregory Peck. And so, yeah, that's why I chose to write it like this because it is, I think, the only way I could have written it, but also the only way I personally could have pointed out the absurdity of the system. And also because immigration is this like big, heavy term that you say that word and everyone's like, oh no, what is he going to say next? Is he for or against? And I don't think it should be that. I think immigration is a story of people and it's the story of a country, right? It's the story of this country. Everyone here is the child of immigrants unless you are 100% Native American. And even then, we're talking about migrations made by, Neanderthals. But everyone here is an immigrant, and that's because immigration is a story of people who chose to go places. That's it. That's all it is. It's not a political term. Immigration is not political. Immigration is just immigration. And so I wanted to create an opportunity to talk about immigration in a way that wasn't sucking the air out of the room. And replacing it perhaps with laughter was the only way I knew how to do it. And it was, I think I say this as a joke, but it's like I think it's the funniest book about the funniest book about immigration because it's the only funny book about immigration that exists. And hopefully there will be more. There will be more ways to talk about immigration because if we keep immigration as a political issue, we're not really talking about it as a thing that we want to fix. We're only talking about it as a like political hot potato that we're just passing around and the humans get hurt and the issue never gets fixed.
Yeah, and I think that something that has come up both in the book and as you've been touring this around is the idea of luck, even within legal immigration, and something that it occurred to me today that you actually haven't talked about very much in the story of luck is your own knowledge or kind of inexperience with the O1B visa, which is that when you first met our mutual friend Robin Virginie, who is an immigrant from the Netherlands, um, I mean, you can tell the story if you want, but it was a very lucky. You talk about this information being available to Americans or people who want to learn about the stories of immigrants. But I think it's also as a result of it being this political weighty issue, that information is kept from immigrants too. So maybe speak a little bit about that specific lucky story.
Yeah, I don't know if it's kept from immigrants or just that I was lazy and not really reading carefully the USCIS website, but I moved here. I was on a student visa, and then I wanted to stay and pursue a career in comedy and writing for television. And I was on my OPT, which is the work permit that you get when you're a student. And I was trying to figure out ways to stay. And I was like, well, I have to get an H-1B, which is for those of you who are not familiar, is the traditional, like what we call a work visa. And to go back to the point of luck, H-1Bs are given by the government once a year, or there's some extra periods, but basically once a year, and they're given via lottery. So like you can be applying and be an employee of like the biggest tech firm in America or Walmart or like any of the big employers companies, S&P 500 companies, or like a small mom and pop shop that can apply and like has there's some requirements, but as long as you fit the requirements and you submit with that company, it's a lottery. And so I was like, I guess that's my best bet is to apply and see if I get the lottery. But I had heard about the O1, which is the artist visa, the alien of extraordinary ability visa, but but had been convinced, I'd become convinced that the only way you could get it was if you had like an Emmy or an Oscar or like a Grammy. And it is part of the requirements. And it actually, if you have one of those, it's actually relatively easy to get one because if you have one of those great big awards, it's like, okay, you are recognized as the top of your industry, but a nomination doesn't count. And um, I was convinced of that. And then one day I was going to which I describe in the book as the most millennial sentence to have ever been written, ever been put to paper, which is I was going to a Bernie Sanders rally at Washington Square Park that was hosted by the band Vampire Weekend. Uh, and so I wanted to go to that, and it's 2016, 2015 and in the summer and maybe early spring. I don't remember, but you can look it up. It's a public event. This really happened. And I wanted to go there and it was packed because obviously I'm not the only person in New York who wants to go see Vampire Weekend and Bernie Sanders do a collab. And so I was like on Facebook, like kind of like, okay, well, I think this is a dud. I was alone and I saw that a friend that I had met in an improv class, Robin Virginie, who is also an immigrant, had posted that she was planning on going. So I Facebook messaged her thinking, if she's ahead of me on the line. If you're familiar with New York, Washington Square Park is on 8th Street, kind of like smack dab in the middle of Manhattan. And if you keep walking north on, like really north, you'll get to 14th Street, obviously. And there's Union Square, which is also a big park. And the line for this event, which was at Washington Square Park, was so long that it went around the park twice and then up Broadway all the way to Union Square, where there's always a rally. So you didn't really know if like that rally was also part of the line. And so I'm like, okay, if Robin is coming to the event, maybe she's ahead of me on the line. Maybe I can get in. So I messaged her like, hey, are you going to this Bernie Sanders thing? The line is crazy. And she's like, oh, I haven't even gotten there. And I'm like, but I'm already on my way. And I'm like, oh, girl, head back. Like, this is bad. And she's like, well, I'm already here. Do you want to just go grab a drink and hang out? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so we went to this crazy restaurant that used to exist in the West Village called Jekyll and Hyde, which I'm not kidding. Imagine the Rainforest Cafe, but instead of like the jungle, the theme is like monsters, like Dr. Frankenstein. And so like the waiters are all dressed like Igor or like the Mad Hatter. Like it's insane. It's an insane concept for a restaurant, and somehow there were three of them in New York before the pandemic. And so we went to this place as a bit, obviously. And I was talking to her and I was like, yeah, I think I'm gonna have to head back to my country, blah, blah, blah. And I knew she was Dutch. Well, I assumed she, must have had like maybe she was Dutch and came here as a child and had a green card. I don't know. And she was like, well, why don't you apply for an O1? And I was like, don't you have to have like an Oscar or an Emmy for that? And she was like, no, I have one. And I was like, what? And she was like, yeah, I mean, she's a very accomplished actor. She is an alien of extraordinary ability. She had done like national tours in musicals, and she had done voice acting in English and in Dutch, like for huge companies like Disney and Nintendo and things like that. So she was an alien of extraordinary ability. She was a very accomplished person. And so she told me, if I hadn't gone to that rally, if I hadn't checked Facebook, I wouldn't have known. And she ended up recommending a lawyer and an immigration lawyer and all that stuff. But my journey starts really, my ability to stay in this country starts with the stroke of luck of choosing to go to this event and of the fact that I checked Facebook and that Robin was online the moment that I checked it, you know, and that I chose to say, yeah, let's go to this silly bar instead of being like, I'm going to head home. This is ridiculous. If I hadn't had that conversation, I literally would not be here. And so the element of luck that is involved, even in legal immigration, even in like the most follow the rules, pay all the money, is crazy. And so for us to be talking about an immigration system where people have to come here the right way, we're talking about a system where like some people get in through the lottery, some people like need to have all these things happen to them for them to be able to stay. There is no right way. There is no right way should require that amount of luck, right? And so I think that is a story that I really haven't talked about a lot, but it is in the book.
It is in the book, and it's something else that is in the book that I think is an antidote kind of to this problem, although it's difficult, right, within the immigrant kind of whisper network, which I am now a part of, um, is that it's not as easy to be forthcoming with this information because we, as a country, are the proponents or opponents of legal immigration or irregular immigration don't want or react badly to the idea that something is actually not as hard as we might think. So the idea that it's like, oh, an O1, an alien of extraordinary ability, that's actually extraordinary ability is actually accessible to more people than immigrants would think. That is something that we maybe don't want to make super public.
Right, because then Fox News will be like, they're not really extraordinary. Right. Yeah. Like, no, yeah, but it's true. And you talked about the Whisper Network. This is something that immigrants all talk to each other. We all like try to learn of each other's experiences, whether it's your family members, your friends. It's like, oh, well, I did this and this worked out for me. And that Whisper Network, which in Spanish or in Colombia, which is where I'm from, we call Correo de las Brujas, which is, I think, a super way cooler term because it's the witch's mail. Uh, it's like the witch's mail, and you don't get the mail, you get the witch's mail, which is like all the, like, yeah, what you hear through the grapevine. That is actually super important because you learn like things and things to avoid in your applications or even, I mean, I don't know if this is true. Again, there's a lot of these things that you just hear and you just take as gospel because you don't want to risk a rejection that like maybe this is where the jokes from London stem from, that the embassy, so once you get your visa approved, even if it's approved, talk about luck, you have to go, if you want to like leave the US and come back in, when you leave you have to go to a US embassy to get the visa stamped on your passport. um, and that way when you come in they can see, oh, this person has a visa that they can stay. But to talk about luck, that even if your case has been approved by the government here in the States, when you go there, if the person at the embassy doesn't want to approve your visa for whatever reason, finds a reason not to approve it, then that's it. Even if you had an approval notice from the government, it doesn't count. That person has the ultimate discretion. But a thing that we heard through the grapevine was that the embassy in London has way more rejections than the embassies in other countries. And I believe that is the joke where I say, like, we don't know. I don't know if this is true. I don't know why. I don't know why people are so angry and grumpy in London, probably because they have to live in London. But it is part of the immigrant experience is talking to other immigrants and talking to other people and kind of like learning all these little tricks and these little, I hate using the word tricks because then they're going to be like, tricky immigrants, here they are. But learning all these little unspoken rules and codes because in the end it is a personal thing, and I think it helps to frame immigration as a personal thing. It is in the end at the mercy of humans, and humans make decisions, and some of them can be mistakes, and some of them can be the right decision, and it's down to luck, and sometimes down to if that officer at the embassy maybe woke up in a bad mood, you know? And so, yeah, I think that does that answer your question?
It certainly does.
Great.
Great job. Um, and I think something else along this line, particularly in uh, with respect to the idea that all Americans, even the well-meaning ones, even the fans of immigration, are operating from a position very often of ignorance, and sometimes an ignorance that, while well-meaning, um, can be possibly harmful, but more often just kind of make immigrants feel a little bit more isolated because they don't want to sort of correct them in that way. I think two examples that we have talked about between ourselves is the reaction to Melania Trump having an EB1 Genius Green Card, and then the outrage at the Trump Gold Card. If you
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit about the people we would generally probably agree with on most things and feel safe and comfortable in their home, doing performative outrage about that.
Yeah, and this is well, you know, we met in 2016, right after the Trump got elected the first time, and this was around the time when we started dating. Like the first couple of months of our relationship was when people were really going after Melania because she wasn't at the White House and she was such a like unconventional quote unquote first lady. I think unconventional, as we have learned, and I learned from you because you're a Missourian, you know, Bess Truman would also be considered an unconventional first lady. Like she didn't move to DC.
She could not have cared less, but in a way that I think is cooler.
Yeah,
But
100%. But like
personally,
the idea of like, oh, well, she's not in the White House, therefore she is a bad first lady is like, no, we have president for that, you know. Uh, and so and so you know, a lot of people were going after her because she's a model. And I think there was a lot of misogyny involved in that. Again, I don't like this person. I don't think she's a cool person. I think she's pretty bad and like straight up like she was promoted birtherism. You know, she wore that like robe, that cape that said I don't really care to you when she visited detention center. Like overall, I think she's not a good person, you know, but I do think that the reaction from the left when she became prime minister, first lady, she is the prime minister of Slovenia, right? When she became first lady was rooted in misogyny and rooted in anger, and we were all angry for understandable reasons, and they were like, well, she blew her way to the top and things like that, and you could see that online and people being like, she doesn't have extraordinary ability, and it's like, well, she was in the cover of like Elle and Vogue, and models also get to apply for alien of extraordinary ability visas and green cards. And so the idea that like she doesn't deserve it because she was just the model is like, well, no, then you're denying a bunch of people who may not be like birther, you know, birther like not cool models the chance to move here and to actually build a life here. And so there was a misunderstanding of like there was a conflation of her personality and what she represented politically with her immigration status, which I think is very dangerous and kind of leads us to the narrative that the right uses about immigration, which is like, well, you know, we see it today with Zoran Mamdani, right? The progressive socialist Democrat who won the primary in New York, which is where we live, which is like, well, he is a naturalized citizen, but we don't like that kind of naturalized citizen, so we can try to like send him out. Like, you know, there's rumors of horrible things about like deporting him, and so the idea of like, oh, we don't like Melania, therefore her immigration status is fair play and we should question it. That's the same narrative. You know, you're playing the same game. And so it was very frustrating for me. And we saw it, you know, we experienced it together firsthand when it was happening. And, now there is some kind of like gray area about whether she might have worked on a tourist visa or overstayed or a certain visa. And that's true. But also, look, if she did, I don't know. I don't think that's that bad a thing. I don't think people overstaying their visas, like I think it's certainly against the law, but if we're going to have the same conversations that we have about like, well, undocumented immigrants who aren't criminals aren't hurting anyone and they shouldn't be deported by ICE, then we can't count that against Melania even if we don't like her. And I think that that's really important to remember when we're talking about immigration because again, it's not a political issue, it's a human issue. And so that was
Allowed to be Americans we don't like.
exactly. In fact, there should be Americans we don't like. That is kind of the problem now with the people who make the decisions about who gets to stay or go. And so that's an issue that I found like very frustrating and maybe partially inspired me to write this book because I was like, oh, I should write the stories of immigrants myself and maybe this person or this like veiled metaphor of or like this simile of a person who could be Melania, could be interpreted to be Melania by the reader, who has a similar story or a story about immigration. And so that I started to think about that idea around 2016, 2017, when I started to think about the book. And then you mentioned the gold cards. That was very funny to me because that was about a week or two. He announced it about a week or two before the book came out, and the response online and really everywhere around liberal circles was like, can you believe this? Can you believe he's putting up our immigration system for sale? And anyone can just buy their way into the country. And I'm like, that exists. It's called an EB-5 and it's $1 million instead of $5 million. You just don't like that it's called a Trump gold card. And yeah, it's tacky for sure, but it exists. And so the idea of this outrage about certain things about immigration by liberals to me was a reinforcement of this idea that like Americans just don't know the system and they have so many opinions about it and so many opinions about immigration. And if we don't like learn about the system and educate ourselves, then we are walking into the people who dislike immigration's narrative and we're walking into their rhetorical treatment of immigration where it's seen as this thing that can be revoked at any time if we simply don't like them. And I think that is very dangerous. And if we learn and educate ourselves on the system, we can have a more human approach to immigration.
Yeah, and something that I think this book does so well, and it's something that I experienced as someone who knew essentially nothing about the immigration system and then now knows everything very personally about a lot of it, is that the lack of knowledge among Americans who do care about immigrants, the basically the ROI of knowing and of
That's
sharing.
return on
Sorry.
investment. If anyone, ROI is return on investment.
Thank you. Um, the the difference and the meaningfulness of knowing about it and being in the presence of an immigrant who realizes in the moment that they don't have to talk around things with you or that they are available, that you are available to them and can speak that part of their language is such, I have seen it be such instantaneous relief and connection and like a meaningful interaction with a person that literally it is just knowledge of some letters and a little bit of empathy for the difficulty. And I think that this book provides like basically keys to padlocks that we are weighing down immigrants with, even those who are told so much by the people around them who love them, oh, you don't have anything to worry about, you're on a student visa or you have a job. And I think that that's something that I'm so proud of you, and it's been so wonderful to be kind of in your home while you're while you're making this.
So nice.
And I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about, we have been now and you have been across America, across this America with this book, which you wrote in a very different time for America, a very different time as an immigrant. And talk a little bit about to our lovely people of Milwaukee. You've also spent a lot of time specifically in the Midwest because it is your adopted American home. Um, Briefly, and then we'll open it up to their questions to add them to the story. But talk about the reception as you've gone through, and both from immigrants and people who love them and people who are curious in different parts of the country, and how you've experienced America through this book.
Well, it's been great that like no like weird right-wing podcast has caught wind of this book. Now, if they did, would we sell more copies? Maybe, but do I want that in my life? Maybe not. But I do think I mean, the response has been wonderful. I think it's again, I think it's become the theme of this talk in particular, and it's funny that it became the theme of this talk on the last one. It is a very human response. The whole thing has been either people learning or people seeing themselves in the book. You know, we've been in New York where we did a comedy show, and that's a very different experience because we're like in this like cabaret theater, like performing. I'm performing a version of the book in a like live stage, but like the MC for the event was my mom, which was your idea, and the people who went to the event were like friends, but also immigrants, and so we had so many people just feel like that. It's just very exhilarating. But then we did an event in Boston, which is a city full of immigrants who are students for the most part. And so finding how to talk to these people and how to communicate through fear, you know, like through the fear, not communicate through fear, but like through the veil of fear that is covering the city. Because I went there to I got my master's at Boston University, and my professors were telling me like, oh yeah, ICE was here last week, so like the students didn't come to class, international students didn't come to class. And so that is horrifying. That's a horrifying statement to hear in America at any point in our history, but especially in the 21st century, where we've like certainly supposedly progressed from, you know, going after a particular type of person, and sending out the authorities against a particular type of person. So it was interesting to find a way to talk through the fear and talk to the humans in the audience and be like, yeah, it is fucked. Sorry to curse, but it is a messed up moment in our country, and it's fine to be scared and it's fine to be angry. And but also let's remember that we are all here and we all feel similarly, that we are all here and that we can protect each other, we can protect our communities, and that we can laugh about it. That even if it's the horrible things are happening, the people who are perpetrating them are like not great people, but also they're pretty dumb. And and you know they are. I know you all know they are, because I had this question in Boston that I really have remembered and will probably remember the rest of my life. I said that I thought Donald Trump was funny, and this like very well-meaning man, and I will never agree with this man, but this older man from the audience said, "I'm sorry, but I just don't see how you can think that man is funny." And I empathize with that feeling. I do empathize with that feeling because the things that he is doing and the things that his government is doing to humans are abhorrent, and I agree. But also, I'm a comedian, and that guy held a basically a like it everything's got to go sale for Teslas outside of the White House, and then got inside a Tesla and said, "Wow, everything is computer." Not computers. Everything is computer inside the car. And that is possibly the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life. That's the funniest reaction to getting inside an Uber. I couldn't have written that. No one could have written, "Wow, everything is computer." Like that is a ridiculous thing to say. And so it is funny, and we have to be able to laugh about it and laugh about him and remind ourselves that the emperor has no clothes, and that we are here and we are a community and we can help each other. And we also did an event in Miami, which is obviously a community that is full of either immigrants or people who are directly touched by immigrants and immigration. And not to say that Milwaukee isn't, but you know, Miami particularly is filled with Latin immigrants, and what we're seeing now is an attack on Latinidad and Hispanic people more than anything, right? You don't really see ICE rounding up a lot of like Norwegian immigrants in Minnesota, even if they are here undocumented or not. You just don't see it. I wonder why. And so in that community, you could feel the anger and you could feel the fear, but also it does fill me with hope to see these rooms, to see people who want to learn, who want to engage, and who want to just say, yeah, this is messed up, and but we're all together in this room. So that's been a really wonderful experience doing this tour all over the country. We've been to 3 cities in the Midwest, which have all been like great and lovely and wonderful. We've been in Kansas City, we've been here in Milwaukee, we were in Chicago yesterday. We've been in the East Coast in New York and Boston, and we've been in the West Coast in Portland and LA and San Francisco. And the truly like the conclusion to me for this tour is that people, one, love immigrants, two, people love to laugh, and three, that we are not alone. I've literally been through this whole country in rooms just like this. Well, not as nice. Boswell is beautiful, but I've been through this whole country, just seeing this community, and I hope you guys felt it like the day of like the No Kings March. That stuff was like really powerful to me, even just watching from New York. A person who, as an immigrant, I was like scared of going out and protesting. I'll say that. I'll admit it and say like I would love to go out and do it, but I don't know. I don't want to give them any reason. And so seeing millions of people across the country parallel, again, they're funny and it is funny, parallel that stupid parade where there was a guy holding a drone, a military big army man. And again, it's not his fault. Someone gave him the order and he has to obey it because it's the army, but it's big army man holding a drone. He's not even flying it, going like, pew, 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 pew. Like that's silly. And he's there and it's raining and he's sitting like this. That's funny. We can laugh about that and we can laugh about him. And if we lose that, then we get really in a bad position. But as long as we keep laughing and believing in the community and believing in immigrants and in people, I think there's hope. I think America's pretty cool. I'm not wearing this just to like avoid, like if ICE stops me, I'm like, not me, like I do genuinely believe America is a great country, possibly the greatest country in the world. And I say it in the conclusion because an immigrant once labeled as the great American experiment, and that was Alexis de Tocqueville. And I think there is something really beautiful about a country that calls itself an experiment. And I think no other country in the world, at least in my experience, I don't know, calls themselves an experiment. I'm from Colombia and we call ourselves like the Republic Glorious, or something like that. And I'm right next to Venezuela, and they call themselves Bolivarian because of Simon Bolivar. And you have the Democratic People's Republic of China, which is just a way to say not really democratic, right? But like no one calls themselves an experiment, and we do, and it's because we believe in being better. That is my interpretation of what an experiment is. You have to keep it's not perfect. You have to keep experimenting to get better. And so to me, that experiment is worth fighting for. And we kind of just gotta like, unfortunately, not leave the experiment in the hands of certain people because they were not paying attention in class and we're all in this group project together.
Yeah, yeah, he liked it. Great. An excellent collaboration from the audience, knowing that was an applause line because it lets me lead right into opening it up to you all for your questions. If you,
How great did she do? She's so great.
it is about me. So does anybody have any questions for Felipe? And if you want me to maybe come bring you a mic, or you can, yeah.
Yes, sir. For the alien of extraordinary ability visa?
The question was, Felipe, what was in basically your application or your request for alien of extraordinary ability? What kind of bragging did you do?
Yeah, I applied for 3, maybe 4 different O1s because they expire after 3 years. and you can do renewals, but I had different employers, so I ended up applying for like up to four before I got my green card. I think three or four. But the first one, I had worked at an ad agency for a long time. I had placed pretty well in a film writing competition. I've been semi-finalist in a pretty big national screenwriting competition.
Okay.
It's a good script. Not produced, but if there's any producers out there. Um, I also had been finalist in a short story competition that a very wonderful writer had judged, and so I put that in there. And so you kind of put all your work and all your like the things that you could brag about basically in there. So I put the awards, that is a section. Another section they ask for is like press that's been written about you. So like anything that's been written about you or work that you have made, even if like your name isn't on it, but you can prove that you worked on it, that counts. And so I had worked in an ad agency and I was lucky enough to, as a copywriter, work for very big clients. I worked for Remy Martin or Remy Martin, the cognac brand, the French cognac brand. And so that's a national, like it's a international brand. And I worked for Major League Soccer, the league. I wrote some ads for them. And so I had done some work for like pretty big companies, even though I was, I don't want to say just a copywriter, but like I was a copywriter. I wasn't like, I didn't have an Emmy, so I had that. And then I also had worked for BuzzFeed at kind of like that big boom of like blogging sites in New York where like it was cool and I don't know, think the TV show Girls, like that era of New York. So I had worked for BuzzFeed and some other sites like that, and that had a lot of cachet. And actually, BuzzFeed had at the time a metrics. You could access the metrics of your articles. So in my application, I actually had how many views articles that I had written had, and they were in the millions because it was BuzzFeed in 2015. It was like everyone was on BuzzFeed. And so that kind of stuff I included. My application was about 780 plus pages.
The
Uh,
first one, the shortest
that's
one.
that's the shortest one because then when you apply again, you send that stuff plus the stuff that you've done after. So that was about 700 plus pages, including like all the legal stuff, like your passport, all that stuff, but also your portfolio, all the work. And then the other stuff that you have to have, which is where a lot of people like you have to have like they're called deal memos. Like people will offer you a job and say like we would like to have you like if you're an artist, you're a musician. It's like, oh, I host a venue here in Milwaukee and I'm gonna have this band play here, do a residence here for 3 months. So that's a deal memo that you include there so that they can be like, oh, your visa is issued for this duration of time. So that is kind of hard because you kind of have to ask people like, would you be willing to hire me for like if I get this visa? It's all very conditional. And then the other thing that is quite hard to get, or like a big part of the application, is the letters of recommendation. So you're required to have at least 10, more or less, letters of recommendations from people in your industry, whatever that industry may be, who are authorities on the industry and who can recognize that who can say like this person's really good, but like a caveat is like they can't be your professors at a grad school, for example, because it's like, yeah, those people are accomplished in the field, but they only know you as a student. They have to be people who know your work. And so that was another thing. And oftentimes these things are judged by people in the USCIS, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, um, processing centers who, not everyone knows like wouldn't know who an expert in like saxophone is, right? If I were judging. So often you also have to include, like I got like, the writer who judged that competition also wrote me a letter of recommendation, and I had to be like, this person's like a big deal. This person's a MacArthur Genius Grant winner. So I had to have a page including that. And then also a page that said a MacArthur Genius Grant is this, because you kind of have to explain, you're trying to cover all your bases. So yeah, my first one was about 780 plus pages. And then after that, I continued to work to prove that I was extraordinary and continued to do the work. And so I included more and more stuff till the last one I think was well over 1,500 pages. And that is funny because then we applied for a green card, and that was also that was also
You
an
guys,
insane amount of
proof
paperwork.
marriage.
Proving that we love each other apparently is
Yeah.
very hard.
It's we still have it because it's a giant accordion folder. Because then it just operates as your kind of like life permanent
Yeah.
folder file. But
It is, I think it's about
it is large.
10 pounds, I would say, the weight of the accordion folder of all our stuff.
It's also strangely intimate, right? Like any cards or notes that we wrote
Yeah.
to each other, like kind of goes in there. They didn't look at it. We don't really raise many flags, but like it was
Wedding invitations, any sort of mail that's mailed to both of us, like that kind of stuff is there. So it's a weird, like, here's a bunch of like legal documents, but also really nice things that like every Christmas card that our friends have sent
Yeah.
us, you know.
It's also, and then we'll open it for questions. It's also talk about luck. I was thinking about this recently and I hadn't really put it together that it's really such a blessing. We're both television writers, and thank goodness neither one of us got a job in LA at any point because not having the same address
That's a red flag.
is actually a red
Yeah.
flag. And so, you know, navigating a long distance marriage and then also having to prove it to the government that it's a real one. I'm glad we didn't have to do that. Any other question? Yeah.
Sure. Yes, the Trump administration approved my excellence 3 times. I didn't get any paperwork approved by the Biden administration, save for my green card.
Yeah.
My green card was approved by the Biden administration, but all.
You're excellent. Biden says we're married.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I think so. Yeah, yeah, yeah. First of all, which is male. I've heard from friends who I know are extraordinary who have gotten it even now. I think an important thing to remember, obviously there's policies and quotas and things that we don't know about, but I do think the people who work in the government are civil servants and they are not necessarily politicized. They may have political beliefs, but I think they are professional enough not to put it into their jobs. I got once an RFE, which is a request for evidence when you send an application and don't have enough, or the government deems that it's not enough. When I was applying for this first O1, I got an RFE, and I was like, oh God, and I had a panic attack, and that's all in the book. But the reason I got the RFE, so I did it. I had this lawyer that a company had provided for me, and I felt very bad for a second, and then I bought a bottle of vodka and got drunk. And then that night, I went through the whole application and the RFE, which they tell you why they think you don't have enough evidence. And I went like line by line, being like, no, I have enough here. I have enough here. I can get more stuff for this. An RFE is not a no. An RFE is just a like, you got to show us more. You have like 60 days to show us more. And I sent it to this other lawyer that I'd been talking to that I had procured myself. And this lawyer responded. I was, waiting for that lawyer to take a million years to get back to me. And got back to me within 40 minutes. I was like, hey, your lawyer applied for the wrong kind of visa. So she had applied for an O1A, which is extraordinary ability in education, sports, and business, and not an O1B, which is extraordinary ability in the arts. And so I was like, the only rejection or the only RFE I've ever gotten in my life came from the Trump administration pretty early on, I think, or maybe it was the Obama administration. I don't remember, but it was, yeah, you don't qualify for this visa. And you know what? I didn't because I don't have extraordinary ability in those things. I have extraordinary ability in the arts. So I think I would because I think the people who do these jobs, those particular jobs in DHS and Homeland Security and USCIS are the same like the civil servants who work at the State Department, which is like the tragedy of Doge, right? We're removing a working like a class of worker who believes in the country, not who believes in the politicized rhetoric of one or other party. These people work for America, period, no matter who's president, kind of like the military. So I think that is why I think I would still get an extraordinary ability visa today.
I will say just because I think it's interesting, the one big change to the O1 visa in particular that the Trump administration made when they got in was that when you were applying for a renewal of an O1B, an alien of extraordinary
And this
ability,
is witch's mail.
this is witch's mail?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay, this is witch's mail. This is what we heard, which is that you did not it was basically assumed that the extraordinary ability stayed. They were just supposed to evaluate whether or not you had work lined up in those deal memos. And what we had heard through Witch's Mail was that the Trump administration, it was like you have to prove extraordinary ability every single time.
Yeah, the idea is like before, if you had been granted an O1 before and you applied for a new one, the assumption is like, well, yeah, they didn't all of a sudden lose the extraordinary ability. With Trump, it was like every time you were starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Okay, we have time for one more. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Uh, the concurrent applications, I think, is something that they don't do. I'm not sure. You'd have to ask my immigration lawyer. Uh, shout out to Dana. I don't know. I don't think they like concurrent applications. I don't think they let you do that. You can't hedge your bets. No, no, no. I think you have to pick one of the
The other thing is an H-1B, you have to have an employer
Yeah.
that agrees to do it. And so if
and
the
it's paid for by the employer. Like H-1B is a whole different system, and it is crazy that it's a lottery. Was that short enough that we have room for one more? Yeah, one more. Yeah. If anyone has one more. If no, then we're good. Yes. Uh, well, in the same way that we're all good, I mean, we're talking about denaturalization. Like, if people are talking about that, then no, and none of us are good if we're talking about denaturalization because, if they're saying like we will denaturalize, well, if they're saying we'll arrest Mahmoud Khalid, who is a green card holder, or if they're saying we're going to denaturalize Zoran Mamdani, it starts with them, but it doesn't end with them, and it doesn't end with brown people, and it doesn't end with people who are born in other countries. We're already sending people to countries that they're not from. So I am good, but in the same way that we are, like, we're all in the same boat now. So
even a marriage green card, which I think we is kind of given the impression that it's kind of the easiest, fastest track, is actually not a full green card. You get a provisional one for 2 years and then they renew it. But a green card does have a different
yes,
burden of proof and revocation, and
you can't revoke a green card in the same way that you revoke a visa, which is why Mahmoud Khalil has a case against the government. And he can't just be arrested. And they went there thinking he had just a visa, and then he said, "No, I'm on a green card." And they said, "Oh, I guess that's revoked too." And that doesn't work like that. So thankfully he is out, and you can agree with him or not politically. That's not the point. Again, it's human. It's immigration is a human thing, and he has rights as a permanent resident of this country.
yes, and right now in that way, you are good.
Yes, in that way I am good.
As a permanent resident,
Yes, I am good.
we can do yeah.
Well, thank you so much, you guys, for coming. Thank you so much for supporting the book, reading the book. Thank you, Boswell. This place is amazing.